Then There's California, a podcast featuring members of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus in conversation about their lives, their legislative priorities, policies, and other related issues that help make California exceptional. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. No one has to tell any parent, the rookie or the seasoned, that when you become a dad or a mom, your life is forever changed. And when, as a new parent, you hold that newborn in your arms, that snapping sound that you hear in the back of your head is the sound of your priorities in life immediately shifting. Parenting in the new millennium is its own new dynamic. Moms and dads of the early 21st century have so much more access than the parents that came before them. More constructive parenting advice, better pre- and postnatal care. But also dads, fathers in the new millennium, are more than ever expected to, and mostly, thankfully, instinctively do, rise to the occasion and are present and involved in their child's and pregnant partner's journey, from the childbirth classes to being right there in the delivery room to the college graduation. But the new millennial fathers are still a unique breed, still compelled by the dueling responsibilities of work priorities and parental priorities and expectations that distracted their forefathers. And what about dads who are elected officials? Well, there are numerous men in the California state legislature who are dads or even grandfathers, and it's just a handful who are new parents and having to juggle the millions of joys and responsibilities of being a young father with their sworn obligations to a million constituents in their district, and being away from home and tending to legislative business in Sacramento for 4 out of 7 days a week. And I'm sure the professional and personal priority pull that those fathers feel is a strong, unique, and conflicting one. And attempting to pull those two poles of life together can certainly get creative. Yes, legislative dads are not any more special than other dads, but we thought it would be interesting, maybe even inspiring, to drag one of our Senate dads away from his daily daunting legislative schedule to talk about his child, life with his child, his aspirations to be the best father ever, but also be an effective lawmaker and representative. So joining us on this edition of Then There's California is one of our Senator dads. Ben Allen represents the 26th Senate District in Southern California, including Santa Monica and other coastal communities. Senator Allen grew up in the community he represents. He is the chair of the Senate Environmental Quality Committee and the legislature's Joint Committee on the Arts. He chairs the Legislative Jewish Caucus and was an author or co-author of several pieces of landmark legislation here in California. But just as important as all of this, Senator Ben Allen and his wife are also the proud first-time and probably sleep-deprived parents of Ezra, born in October. So Ezra's Senator Dad joins us now. Senator Ben Allen, welcome to Then There's California.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
So are you getting sleep?
It's a complicated question. Definitely more than in the first couple months. And more than my wife, but certainly not as much as I used to.
Your son's name is Ezra.
Ezra. That's
He's 6 months old, right?
He's just turned 5 months. Well, actually, no. Now he's about 5.5 months old. Yep.
Tell me about Ezra. Tell me about being Ezra's dad.
Yeah. Well, we like to say that my wife and I have taken in a new roommate who doesn't pay any rent, keeps very erratic hours, and drinks all the milk. But in general, he's a lot of fun. We really do enjoy being with him. He's a sweet little kid, wonderful chubby cheeks that are just eminently kissable, and he's a great little guy. I mean, there's a moment at which a baby transitions from just crying and peeing and pooing and sleeping and staring blankly at you to where they start to smile and laugh, and even if you can't have a conversation with them, they're much more personable, and that moment has been magical. I mean, really, that was a very nice transition because all of a sudden you feel all that feedback, all that work, all that love that you're putting into the kid is actually being recognized and returned.
And I loved your metaphor, and I imagine when he turns 18, he will still be the same, not paying rent, drinking all the milk.
Yes, maybe a different kind of milk at that point, but yes, certainly.
Our parenting instincts, our skills, and our desires are often based on our family lives growing up, our parents, where we were in the family pecking order with our brothers and sisters. Share some of your family history. And from what I understand, you are the youngest but 2 older brothers? Or
I have one older brother,
uh-huh.
And he's my half-brother biologically. My dad did play a major role in raising him. I mean, basically during vacation time, he would go off and be with his biological dad. But during school, he'd be with my mom and my dad. And, I know that my brother Will really believes that he has two fathers. I mean, the two of them played such an important role in his upbringing. Just the other night, we were all having a wonderful birthday dinner for my father. And so now my brother's 10 years older than me.
Okay.
Quite a bit older. And so we really hung out. We had a good time, but it was always there was such a big age gap that we didn't grow up in the same way that two siblings who are more close in age would typically. And it was, I remember there was this moment where when I was 6, I think actually he took me out to dinner while my family prepared for a surprise 16th birthday for me at the house. And that was a special dinner for me because that's when I felt like we really were able to connect as adults. But my parents were loving, engaging parents. They still are. I'm so blessed to have them and all their vibrancy. And I had a really, really good family life growing up. Actually, I'm really grateful to them for providing me with all the love and support that I needed to be able to grow up as a happy, successful person. And I'm hoping to replicate that for our kid. We're not able to afford, the housing prices are a little higher now than they were. I mean, my father was a public university professor. My mom was a school teacher, and they could somehow afford a nice, decent house in Santa Monica, which is not something that we can on our salaries. But we're making it work. And I will say that some parents try to run away from their parents' parenting style.
Right.
I'm trying to run toward my parents' parenting
Well, that
style.
actually was going to be one of my questions. Do you want to be like the father that you have had in your life? Do you want to do things differently?
I know obviously we're different people and we'll do things a little differently, but I really do hold up my father very high esteem, and I really would like to make sure that I incorporate a lot of what he built into our relationship. What we used to do that I certainly want to do with my son is go hiking, walking in the hills. We both in England, where he grew up, in the hills above where his hometown, and then here in Los Angeles, up in the Santa Monica Mountains. We would go off nearly every weekend for a hike together, and it was just a wonderful opportunity for us to bond and talk and enjoy nature and have conversation. And he'd tell me stories, and we learned about each other, and that was very special, and it's something I certainly want to replicate. But we're different people. We're going to have different styles, and I'm sure there'll be mistakes that I make that he didn't make. But I do see my parents as a model and the type of parenting that I'd like to provide for my son.
Your older brother had children, right?
He's got 2 kids. Yeah, 2 wonderful kids.
But that was quite a while ago, right?
Yeah, so one of them's now a freshman at UCLA,
Uh-huh.
and the other one's a freshman at Santa Monica High School, my old high school. Yeah, they're quite a bit older than my little 5.5-month-old baby.
Well, so when Ezra came along, even though he was not the first grandchild on your parents' side, he was the first grandchild in a long time, so it was almost like a new celebration, right?
Absolutely, big time. And in fact, my nephew was actually said how excited he is to finally no longer be the baby in the family. His mother has a bunch of sisters, and they have lots of kids. And so there's all these cousins on my sister-in-law's side. And Moses, my nephew, was the youngest of all of them. So finally, he's no longer the youngest of all the cousins. And so I think that's exciting for him.
And what about on Melanie, your wife Melanie? She's an attorney on her side of the family. Is that the first grandchild?
First grandchild.
And I bring that up because that's always a big deal in families when that first child comes along.
It's a big deal. And I will say we had some very sad news this year. My father-in-law passed away a month or 2 ago.
Oh, wow.
And I will say that I think it's our entire family is so grateful that he got some quality bonding time with the baby.
Wonderful.
His first and as yet only grandchild before he passed. And having the baby there while my father-in-law was sick, I think provided a wonderful source of levity and distraction and joy into what would have otherwise been a devastating experience for everyone, including for him. And I think it was just symbolic of the excitement that we as humans feel when we touch the next generation. And when we first got there, actually on our second trip out to Ohio, and he was asleep for 2 hours, but we sat there with him, and then he woke up. He saw exactly what had happened, and the first thing he did was reach out to the baby, hug the baby, give the baby this enormous set of kisses, and he was able to then talk for a little bit. And then he fell back asleep. But there was this visceral moment where he recognized the baby and just wanted to reach out to him and hold him close.
That's beautiful.
And that was very special.
That will be one of the blessings for Ezra, is to hear the story about his grandfather.
I'm just sad that he won't be able to really get to know him. It's kind of like what happened with my grandfather. I only remember him on his deathbed.
Thank you for sharing that. And that's one of those bittersweet dynamics in parenting, is losing family that have been around before and losing that connection that they have with the new generation.
Yeah.
So From the day-to-day logistics, how has life changed from being a single man to then a married guy to now being a parent?
I mean, a lot. Especially being in the legislature where you're living and working in two cities at once and running all over the place all the time. I really did work hard in my first term in the Senate to be everywhere all the time, and we would accept every invitation. And partly it's because I wanted to build up good relationships with everyone, but I also wanted to build up a little bit of capital with folks so that when I did have a child, they would understand that I just couldn't possibly be everywhere at once once I had the kid. We have a great staff both up here in Sacramento and also in Los Angeles in the district, and so they do a lot of the work to make sure that we're reaching out and engaging and being in touch with everybody. But we have had to cut back on all of the commitments, that I had before. Now we're trying to get me back in time to be able to have dinner. My wife and baby are actually traveling back and forth with me between the district and Sacramento. My wife has been on a leave of absence, which has been great. And so we've been actually building two homes together. And now I take a little packet home and I, read it when he goes to sleep, and we have dinner. I give him a bath and then we put him to bed, and then I'm able to go through some of the documents to prepare for the next day. But it's a challenge. I used to be able to just kind of leave the office 40 minutes before a plane took off and run back and forth and flit around. Now I have to build in a lot more time. I mean, just getting the baby out of the house, packing the bag.
Absolutely. That's one thing I notice as a father. The time it takes you to get in and out of a car, for starters.
It's totally different.
Add like 5 minutes to that.
I just have to, and the thing is, there's also a level of unpredictability. I mean,
yes.
The legislature, we're so used to having these very regimented time schedules. So we got a 9 to 9:15 meeting, and then 9 to 15, 9:30, and then you're going to go into this, then you're going to that. Baby doesn't work that way, right? Baby may decide that it's time to go to the bathroom and or they want to eat, or they're not happy with their position, and there's not that same sort of regimentation. Now I will say he loves meeting new people. He's been a lot of fun to bring to conferences and events.
The picture you showed me before we started here, that beautiful smile, he's like the family ambassador, isn't he?
He's a pretty, thank God he's got a sweet smile and is actually very sociable, because that would be tough otherwise. So he's been fun. I will say, I mean, it is hard. I'm traveling, we drive to a conference, for example, and he's in the back seat, and sometimes he just gets so sad that he can't see anybody, and we have to stop the car. My wife jumps in the back and talks to him and sings to him and looks at him.
How sweet.
So that he knows that we're there. I mean, it's ridiculous. He's 5.5 months old, and he's probably been on 20 airplanes already. He's been across the country a couple times. He's driven all over the state. So he's a well-traveled little bear.
And by virtue of your job and your wife's job, he's probably met 250,000 more people than the average baby has too. So.
Yeah. So he's handling it pretty well. It does make the sleep schedule difficult. We're not able to impose the same kind of strict regimen that a lot of parents like to do, but we're living in two places and we're constantly moving around. It's just a different experience. It's almost like a hunter-gatherer family chasing a mastodon across the savannah. That's how
that is the most incredible parenting metaphor I've ever heard.
That's what
I mentioned in the outset the priority click, when all of a sudden you have that child in your arms, and all of a sudden the worries of the world, the responsibilities, the daily tick-tock of the schedule matters nothing compared to the life you have right in front of you. Did you feel that too?
Oh, first of all, I hate to say this, but when I first got engaged, my Sacramento staff, an experienced staff that's worked with other members of the assembly, especially who were younger and had children, they said, we're not telling you what to do and we're not trying to run your life, but if you are just having a child, it's much easier to have a child as a legislator when we're out of session than when we're in session. You understand the science just as well as anybody else. We're just putting that out there. Sure enough, we were able to successfully time our baby's birth to the fall recess. The baby was born a few weeks before my reelection, which was a little stressful, but everything worked out great. But it did give us a good chunk of time where I really could take a nice leave of absence without there being too much of an impact on the legislative work. And so that did allow for a nice kind of transition. And everybody knew that was the plan. And so it allowed me to really spend time with the baby, get used to having a baby, be an active diaper changer at 3 a.m, and do so in a way that didn't impact my work too much. And over time, we then eased into the transition of the legislative session starting. And I will say, it's funny, you talk about it being a moment that just kicks in. I actually think it's been more gradual for me. As I've become more accustomed to the enormity of having a child and everything that means. And you just start to think about, and especially as the baby develops a personality, you start to consider him as a real person, as a real thing, as something that I'm going to have a relationship with and who's going to have a future. And I just get more, and every day I get more and more bought into making that future special and a part of my life as a major priority. But for me, it's been a bit of a transition, I suppose. I mean, I think at the beginning, it's a rote experience. I mean, you loving this baby, but the baby is just so needy, and you're so exhausted, and you're just kind of going through the motions and putting him to sleep and changing his diaper and trying to stop him from crying. But once they start to develop a little bit of personality and start to smile and laugh and interact, the whole thing starts to flower in a way that's so enriching. And so for me, I think it's been a little bit more of a transition into this realization that I actually have a child, and this is a lifelong relationship.
For many women who give birth, there's this natural connection to a child that happens sooner, where sometimes dads can't wrap their heads around being a dad until there's a child in their arms. Yeah. Considering everything you've just told me, did you feel that with Ezra's birth too?
A little bit. My wife was very into reading all the books. I did some reading, but not as much as she had. And, look, she's got a little thing squirming around in her tummy for 9 months, kicking her, hitting her, hiccuping. And it's fun to feel that and talk to her belly and everything, but it's not the same. It's not the same as when you actually have it inside you and when you actually give birth to the baby. And by the way, that's a wild experience. I was there every step of the way, but my wife is a soldier. She really she had a long labor and it was very intense. And I will always be so in awe of her having gone through that and having gone through it so successfully. So I do think it's harder for dads to immediately jump in and bond. But I do think you're also right in your opening comments that fathers are starting to take, there is a bit of a cultural shift in this. I think there's more of an expectation, and just even amongst my own friends, my male friends, talking to folks from my father's generation, there does seem to be a different attitude. It's not that dads haven't been into being dads for a long, long time, but I think especially at the younger stages, dads are stepping up more than they used to.
Absolutely. I mean, your dad likely wasn't in the delivery room when you were born.
He wasn't, yeah.
Yeah, and that was the way it was. Dads waited out in the waiting room till the doctor came out and said, you have a proud baby boy.
Yeah.
And so I think it's understandable, even here in this new millennium, we sort of reflexively sometimes default to our past history, even subliminally, of this is the mom's job. Obviously, you have an awareness of that. It's easier said than done sometimes.
It is. And, we're nursing, right? We're breastfeeding, right? That's something that I just can't physically do. He doesn't love the bottle. I mean, he likes to fall asleep breastfeeding. So there's a whole slew of responsibilities that are just harder for me to do. And then of course, it's true. My wife has taken the leave. I'm back at work. I'm trying to balance it all. So it's going to be a new test when she goes back to work. If she's going to go back part-time, that's going to put a whole new slew of responsibilities and challenges and pressures on us as a couple and as a family. We're trying to be as egalitarian as we can, but I will say I do continue to be, just my hat's off to my wife for the extent to which she has just stepped up and taken care of so much.
Do you see yourself in the future having to step back from something you really want to do for your future because of your obligations to your family and to your son?
I will say it is something. When we think about our own career questions and and also just cost pressures and also just the logistics of the travel, it does make it difficult for us to be as sure about having a second child. I mean, just even traveling on the plane with one baby is just different. It would be so much harder to travel with two. And to do that every week or every other week, it would be really tough. So I think we're trying to make it all work. I mean, as I say, my wife's going to go back to a part-time situation. I mean, her work has been fantastic about accommodating, and we're going to get a nanny, and we're going to make it all work. And I think we can do it in a way that strikes a good balance between family and career. I like to think we're going to be able to make it work.
You're listening to Then There's California. We're talking to one of our Senate dads, State Senator Ben Allen of Santa Monica, talking about being a dad to his little boy, Ezra. You're not the only dad. You're one of the youngest dads in the legislature. Do you get dad advice from some of your other colleagues who are fathers and grandfathers?
Oh, I do. I mean, there's been a lot of interesting lines. And one of the lines someone told me right after the baby was born said, "Welcome to a lifetime of worry." That's one of my favorites. I am, one of the younger members of the Senate, and a lot of the members had kids and raised their kids before they got into politics. And so a lot of them are now having grandkids, and they're so excited about their grandkids. But it is a different experience being in the legislature with a kid all at once. There are a few of us young parents, but we are definitely more the exception than the rule.
Have you been dad shamed yet? And I ask because I've heard stories of guys who are confronted by strangers sometimes in public places, and they'll start giving them this critique about their dad etiquette.
Yeah, not yet. Someone did have opinion. Someone was telling me that I was bouncing my baby too much, that I was setting myself up for disaster because he would only be soothed by being bounced around. And that I got once. I get these. People make comments from time to time. Everyone wants to weigh in. I mean, usually it's done in the spirit of helpfulness. I will say, having a kid, it's so hard and it's so complicated. And yet other people, especially if they have never had a child before, have a lot of opinions. You just have to learn to be thick-skinned about it and let the water go off your back. By the way, that's a good skill set for politics, too. As an elected official, you're criticized so much that dad shaming is the least of my worries.
Let's talk about being the legislative dad. How has being a parent brought into sharper focus your legislative priorities? And I don't mean banning plastics from the ocean, promoting vaccinations. That's good for all of us. Sure, we could say that applies to your son. But how has Ezra's presence in your life reframed your thinking about legislation? Like, I want to do this because I want the world that my son is going to be in to be a better place.
It's interesting you say all that. I mean, I have always cared about a future-oriented public policy making. And I always cared about the future, but now I feel as though I have a whole nother stake in the future that's much more profound than I ever had before. It was more of a theoretical exercise, but there is something about having a child and having that connection deep into the human future that gives me a deeper connection to the sort of policies that we're looking at, whether they be improving our society, protecting our environment, etc. I will also say that experiencing parenthood and seeing how hard it is to do it right and to do it with all the care and attention and love that you want to put in while also working a busy job, has given me a whole nother level of wonder and respect, but also concern for folks who are trying to raise a kid under more difficult circumstances than we are. Single parent, someone without resources, someone without the kind of professional opportunities that we have, someone without a stable home.
That's a very good point. Does it humble you to think that Ezra is going to grow up in this extraordinary family, nutrition, health, a totally different life than maybe a child 5 miles away in Santa Monica?
Yeah, you absolutely. I'm someone who studied education issues for a long time. I was on the school board and taught education law and policy, so we do spend a lot of time in those circles talking about disparity and talking about the impacts that the home life and the school skills and tools that a parent gives to a kid can impact on their lifetime educational trajectory. But having a baby right in front of me and seeing my strengths and weaknesses imparted upon and into that child really does make you reflect all the more on the way that we raise children as a society and the disparities that end up promulgating in that space. But I will say it does give me a lot more sympathy and concern for particularly all those single moms out there who are struggling to make it work, who are in poverty. We are not giving them enough tools to raise those kids. Then we wonder why it is that those kids end up struggling in school and falling into trouble. It really does make me want to support more policies that are children oriented and that really give parents the scaffolding they need, the support they need to raise happy, successful children. And right now we're not doing that. We put all this emphasis and energy into other things. And if you look at what European countries do with regards to early childhood education and childcare opportunities and family leave policies, all of those kinds of things make such a difference in raising happy kids. And by the way, they end up having a real long-term follow-on effect for society, right? Mm-hmm. You end up with kids who have better numeracy and literacy skills. end up kids that are better socialized, less likely to end up in prison, less likely to end up dropping out, more likely to end up in successful careers, raising happy families themselves, less likely to end up in the criminal justice system. I mean, all those things that end up being tremendous costs on society really do have their roots in the tools that we're giving the young parents. And I knew that all intellectually before, but I'm really getting a dose of that reality now, trying to raise a kid myself.
It becomes personal.
Absolutely.
It really does. What about faith? I know that your Jewish faith is prominent in your personal and public life. What about for Ezra? Is that your hope for him, that he will
it is.
be raised in your faith?
I certainly want to. We're trying to raise him in the traditions of the Jewish faith, and we want to create. One of the things we love about Judaism, and one of the things I think my wife most likes about Judaism especially, is just the ritual and the schedule, the calendar, all the holidays, the symbols, and the stories behind those holidays. Each holiday has a story of social justice or redemption or self-reflection or rest or separation of the work life and spiritual life and family life. So I'm certainly hoping to build a deep-seated respect for wonder and for humility and for spirituality, and also respect for other folks' religions too in him. And I don't think we're going to be very doctrinaire and dogmatic about the way we impart the faith, but I do think giving him access to this several millennia old tradition of history and ethics, let him feel a certain ownership over that history and heritage, is an exciting thing too. I mean, that's something I'm certainly going to prioritize and I'm excited about helping to impart.
Going back to what you were talking about with your own family's experience and the love in your family, there is a belief out there that having a child, and you've already spoken to this, having a child opens you up in a way that it causes you to look at the world totally differently, that as a new dad, you as a person, you may have only felt romantic love before, or the love you felt for your parents or your siblings, but now you're experiencing this really warm sense of protection for another human being. That men are supposed to be strong, but oops, guess what? You're vulnerable. Do you recognize that? Have you started to see that?
Yeah. And by the way, the first moment for me was during the pregnancy when we went on a bike ride and I was in front of my wife. My wife was probably, I don't know, maybe 6 months pregnant. So she had a tummy at that point. And we were biking along and I stopped quickly because we were going in the wrong direction. And she stopped fast and then fell off the bike and fell onto her side. And it was such a scary moment. I mean, the baby was ultimately totally fine, but this almost animalistic protector instinct suddenly jumped into me, and I just flew off the bike and wanted to cradle her and cradle the womb. And it was a very strange but powerful feeling that overtook me at that moment. And it was something that I hadn't really ever experienced before. Thank God we haven't been in any situation where there's been any significant danger, and I'm touching wood right now.
Sure.
I will say these babies are not only helpless, but they're reckless. I mean, if I'm holding him in a precarious position, he seems to go out of his way to try to fall out of my arms onto a hard floor. And so I
think every parent listening to this absolutely can identify.
I mean, from an evolutionary perspective, it's ridiculous.
It definitely shows that as a parent, you do in some ways become much more in touch with your own humanity and the fragility of the world.
Oh yeah. I mean, really, he is so dependent and so fragile and so helpless. It's my responsibility. We just have to protect him and make it work. I mean, you can't just walk away as you can with a cat or any sort of other responsibility. I mean, in work and life, if you don't finish your task for the day, you're the one who's held accountable for that. But there's this baby that I've taken on this responsibility for that I have to be there for, and whether I like it or not. And of course, I happen to like the kid and have that that parental love and protection for him. But it's quite a responsibility, and I'm actually surprised that kids end up as successful as they do, given how hard it is for parents.
You just summed up a millennium's worth of challenge for every parent.
I will say one thing. Having a child also gives you so much respect for your own parents. I mean, you never realize until you have your own baby how hard it is. And it's amazing. I mean, I laugh, especially, I know a lot of parents who have parents of teenagers, and it is just, it's so funny to think about how much sacrifice they put into their little baby, and now they're talking back to them and
Well, I will tell you, as a parent of 2 adult girls, the joy when they come back to you having had their own kids and say, Dad, I never knew how hard it really was. And at that point, you have to have the grace to say, yes, you're right, but it'll all work out.
Yep.
Final question. Looking into the future with Ezra, dreaming about and projecting your hopes and dreams for how you want him to be as a person. You've talked about that here. How much or how little control you're going to have over him as he grows, because there's going to be a certain point when you can't jump in. So as the father of a 5-6-month-old, talk about that, projecting your own hopes and fears and dreams for him versus what might be the reality.
Well, I hope he is happy. I hope he is curious, engaged. I think we have an immensely exciting and beautiful but complicated world that we live in, that's filled with challenges and problems and also tremendous beauty, both in the physical world and in the human world. I hope he develops a real deep appreciation for both of those. I hope that he develops his own sense of self and self-confidence and charts a path for himself that's deeply fulfilling. And that's ultimately what I hope for him. I hope that I can play a role in helping to guide that I help to instill in him a sense of self-confidence and self-direction that will truly be self-guided, but that he'll feel confident pursuing because of the background and the strength and the love and the nurturing and the education that we provided to him. So that's what I hope for him. I don't know that I have any particular, there's no career goal or anything like that. I really do hope he develops a sense of wonder and excitement and never-ending curiosity. I guess my greatest hope for him is that he becomes a lifelong learner and someone who looks at the world and wants to grasp and both enjoy its beauty and complexity, but also help to solve its problems.
I cannot think of a better, more appropriate way to end this conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time out of what I know is a crazy schedule here this time of year and sharing a little about your personal life, peeling the onion back on life with little Ezra.
This was so much fun. And I mentioned to you before we started taping that of all the interviews I've done, I bet this is the one that I'm most likely going to want to listen to 20 years from now and listen to with my son. And that's an exciting and wonderful thing. I just appreciate having this opportunity.
That's sweet. Thank you very much. Senator Ben Allen from Santa Monica, and talking about being a Senate dad to little Ezra. And that's it for Then There's California. We're a production of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus, with technical assistance and great ideas and support from Martin Ashley, Bob Brulte, Brian Shadden, and Rainier Sabiniano, George Soares, McLeana Woods, Ariana Medell, Lisa Murphy, Aaron Kasheshian, and the graphic design talents of Tim Davis. I promise you this is a podcast that's not done just by me. On behalf of one of our proud new dads in the State Senate, Ben Allen, representing Santa Monica in Southern California, I'm Brian Green at the State Capitol in Sacramento, and thanks for listening to Then There's California.